It's actually the people around the whole world logging on to Netflix last night to find not one, not two, but 3 episodes from the new Harry and Meghan documentary. And after years of speculation, we got to hear their side of the story, their relationship, and also what happens beyond the tabloids.
What if the narrative Meghan Markle spent years carefully building was never as solid as it appeared? In a stunning development that has royal watchers buzzing, Prince William is reportedly standing firm as fresh scrutiny exposes contradictions, unanswered questions, and claims that refuse to fade. As pressure mounts and public opinion shifts, the carefully crafted image that once captivated millions appears to be facing its biggest challenge yet. So, could this be the moment everything finally starts to unravel? Do you really believe Meghan has been misunderstood? Share your views in the comments below. To help us bring you more royal updates and uncover the stories making headlines, please subscribe. The agreement that refuses to stay buried. The document never disappeared. Long after the headlines faded and the cameras moved on, the agreement remained exactly where it had always been preserved on the royal family's official website, outlining the terms of a departure that was meant to bring closure. It was the result of a pivotal meeting at Sandringham between Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and the late Queen Elizabeth II, a carefully negotiated arrangement reached in the opening months of 2020. Both sides walked away with something valuable. Harry and Meghan would retain their Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles, while agreeing not to use the style of His or Her Royal Highness in public, commercial, or professional settings. The terms were clear, formal, and publicly recorded. Yet years later, that agreement found itself back at the center of controversy, not because anyone had changed the document, but because questions began emerging about whether its spirit was being respected. By the spring of 2025, Meghan's social media presence had become a powerful platform reaching millions across the world. Then came a post that immediately caught attention. Among the images shared with followers was a letter from a senior Ukrainian official. What stood out was not the message itself, but the salutation displayed prominently at the top. The words, "Your Royal Highness," appeared unedited and fully visible. There was no accompanying note explaining that the title was a diplomatic courtesy, nor any clarification that the couple had previously agreed not to use the style. Critics were quick to react. Some viewed the post as a harmless oversight. Others saw something far more deliberate. To them, the issue was not the letter, but the decision to publish it exactly as it appeared. The debate intensified because the image was shared on a highly visible platform connected to Meghan's growing business ventures, raising fresh questions about where the boundary between royal identity and commercial activity truly lies. What made the situation especially striking was that it did not emerge in isolation. For some royal observers, the post seemed to fit into a broader pattern of moments that repeatedly reopened old arguments many believed had been settled years earlier. The agreement crafted in 2020 was intended to provide a clean break and a clear future for both sides. Instead, every new controversy appears to pull that same document back into the spotlight, reminding the public that some royal arrangements may be signed on paper, yet never fully resolved in the court of public opinion. Was that brief on-camera correction really just a harmless slip, or did it expose something deeper about identity, image, and control? What made Meghan so quick to reject her former name? And how does the Sandringham Agreement of 2020 connect to a pattern critics say has been building ever since? Let's unravel the details. Evidence Meghan cannot explain away. One brief moment on camera may have revealed far more than anyone expected. During a filmed conversation for Netflix, when actress Mindy Kaling casually referred to her as Meghan Markle, Meghan quickly interrupted to correct it, instantly catching attention. She insisted that she was now Sussex. It seemed like a harmless exchange at first, but critics later pointed to that single remark as part of a much larger pattern that had been building for years. The controversy traces back to the agreement reached at Sandringham in January of 2020, when Prince Harry and Meghan stepped away from official royal duties. At the time, public statements made clear that the couple would no longer use their royal status for commercial purposes. The arrangement appeared straightforward. Yet, according to several observers, what followed raised difficult questions. Long before the Netflix scene sparked debate, there had already been other incidents drawing scrutiny. A gift basket sent to podcast host Jaime King reportedly carried Meghan's HRH styling, despite previous assurances surrounding its use. Critics argued that this was not a diplomatic document or an official state matter. It was a personal gesture, delivered commercially, and therefore impossible to dismiss as a simple formality. What makes the discussion so persistent is that none of these examples exist only as rumors. The Sandringham Agreement remains publicly available. Social media posts have been archived. The gift basket has been documented. The Netflix footage can still be viewed by millions. Together, they form a collection of evidence that commentators believe is increasingly difficult to explain away. Royal commentator Kinsey Schofield has argued that the couple continue to benefit from the prestige attached to their titles, while privacy specialist Trevor Cook suggested that the issue could potentially carry legal implications if commercial activities conflict with earlier commitments. Legal experts often describe such situations using terms connected to misrepresentation, where the basis of an agreement later becomes disputed. Yet perhaps the most revealing judgment did not come from lawyers, commentators, or even royal insiders. It came from the marketplace itself. Behind the headlines, public statements, and ongoing debates, audiences were already delivering their own verdict. The figures, according to industry observers, began telling a story that neither public relations strategies nor carefully crafted narratives could easily control, and those numbers would soon become impossible to ignore. By spring 2026, a quiet but unmistakable shift emerged as major media giants began distancing themselves from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle without public conflict or dramatic announcements. What triggered this coordinated withdrawal? And how did separate organizations arrive at the same conclusion almost simultaneously behind closed doors? Let's uncover the intriguing details. The brand that lost its magic. By the spring of 2026, something unusual had become impossible to ignore. One after another, some of the world's most powerful media companies were quietly stepping away from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. There were no explosive press conferences, no dramatic public battles, and no shocking statements from palace officials. Yet the pattern unfolding behind the scenes spoke louder than any headline ever could. The most surprising part was not that a single partnership had ended. It was that several major organizations, each operating in different industries, appeared to be reaching the same conclusion at almost the same time. Years earlier, in 2020, the Sussexes had been viewed as one of the most valuable brands in the world. Companies saw enormous potential in their royal connections, global fame, and ability to attract attention. That belief led to extraordinary deals worth tens of millions of dollars. Publishers, streaming platforms, and audio giants all invested heavily, convinced they were securing access to a modern royal story that audiences would follow for years. For a while, the strategy seemed to work. Interest was high, projects generated headlines, and the Sussex name carried considerable commercial power. But as time passed, expectations began colliding with results. One of the clearest signs emerged when Spotify's highly publicized podcast agreement came to an end after producing only a limited amount of content. The separation became even more memorable when executive Bill Simmons publicly criticized the couple, using language that stunned industry observers and raised questions about what had happened behind closed doors. Then came another setback. In April of 2026, reports indicated that Penguin Random House had allowed a major book arrangement to expire without extending it. This was particularly noteworthy because Harry's memoir had become a worldwide success. Publishers rarely walk away from profitable relationships unless deeper concerns begin outweighing potential rewards. Only weeks earlier, Netflix had also ended its relationship with Archewell Productions. The company that had once reportedly committed around $100 million to the partnership simply moved on. According to industry sources, enthusiasm that once surrounded the project had largely vanished. Viewed separately, each development could have been dismissed as ordinary business. Together, they painted a very different picture. a streaming giant, a publishing powerhouse, and a leading audio platform, all stepping back within a relatively short period, created the impression of a broader industry judgment rather than a temporary setback. At the center of every agreement stood the same asset: the Sussex identity itself. Their royal connection was the foundation upon which these enormous deals were built. That reality has also fueled growing speculation about the future, particularly regarding the possibility that Prince William, when he eventually becomes king, could revisit questions surrounding royal titles. Whether that ever happens remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that the value once attached to the Sussex brand no longer appears as unquestionable as it did just a few years ago. What lies beneath the carefully polished image of a global lifestyle brand built around Meghan Markle? How did a childhood moment she once described watching a Procter & Gamble advert at 11 become the starting point of a narrative that still shadows her through every interview, deal, and public reinvention? Let's find out. The story that built a brand. What remains is a polished lifestyle brand, a renamed identity selling jars of jam at prices that only make sense when attached to the aura of the Duchess of Sussex. But behind the streaming deals, media partnerships, and carefully shaped public appearances, there is an older narrative that has followed her into every new phase of attention and influence. Long before Montecito homes, global interviews, and lifestyle ventures, there was a story she repeatedly shared. At 11 years old, she saw a Procter & Gamble advertisement she believed was unfair toward women. According to her account, she wrote letters to powerful figures, including Hillary Clinton, and pushed for change. The story later became a defining part of her public image, appearing in speeches at the United Nations, at One Young World gatherings, in magazine features, and even resurfacing during a visit to Colombia in 2024. As her public profile expanded, the same childhood moment was used again and again as a symbol of early activism and moral clarity. Yet over time, scrutiny began to build around it. Journalistic checks into the claim found no verifiable record from Procter & Gamble confirming the specific account, and no evidence from Hillary Clinton's office supporting the existence of such correspondence. The absence of documentation raised questions that gradually grew louder in public discussion. In a documentary released in 2020, Thomas Markle suggested a more ordinary explanation, describing the episode as part of a school-based letter-writing exercise rather than a solo effort that changed corporate behavior. Around the same time, editorial teams preparing official press materials reportedly chose not to include the story, a decision widely interpreted as a move to avoid further controversy. Still, the narrative did not vanish. It continued to appear in interviews and profiles, becoming tightly woven into the way her journey was presented. Admirers viewed it as proof of early conviction, while critics pointed to the lack of confirmation as a troubling gap between memory and record. The tension between these views only deepened as her influence extended into streaming projects and lifestyle branding. Over time, the discussion shifted from the details of what happened to the meaning of what was believed. The story became more than a childhood memory. It turned into a foundation stone for a carefully constructed public identity, one that connected activism, storytelling, and personal branding in the modern media age. Ultimately, it became less about a single childhood moment and more about how narratives endure when repeated across platforms and years, even when certainty begins to fade under scrutiny. The discussion continues to evolve in public discourse today across media and audiences worldwide. Meghan's claims of feeling unsupported set off a wave of discussion that reshaped public opinion of her royal experience. But what really lay behind those departures and reports? Was it simply misunderstanding, or something deeper within her working environment that led to nearly 18 staff exits between 2020 and 2026, raising even more unanswered questions? Now let's uncover the astonishing details. Between testimony and silence. Meghan told Oprah she felt unsupported inside the institution. In the years that followed, her account of life within the royal environment became one of the most widely discussed modern royal narratives, shaping debates that stretched far beyond a single interview. What followed was not a straight line of claims and replies, but a wider pattern of reports, departures, and internal reviews that kept drawing attention back to the same question: what was happening inside her working world that so many chose to leave? Between 2020 and 2026, around 18 staff members reportedly exited roles connected to her operations. That figure, averaging roughly 3 departures each year, was repeatedly cited in discussions about stability and workplace culture. These were not vague mentions, but described as professional exits involving experienced individuals who had worked in demanding public roles before joining the same environment. One of the most frequently referenced figures in these accounts was Samantha Cohen, a veteran royal aide with 17 years of service inside the British royal household. In 2018, she stepped in as private secretary, originally expected to remain for 6 months to help structure a stable team. The plan shifted when her stay stretched to 18 months as efforts to secure a permanent replacement repeatedly failed. At one point, a proposed successor was sent to Africa to shadow her during a royal tour, yet the individual reportedly resigned before the tour ended. Years later, in 2024, Cohen spoke publicly about aspects of the staffing challenges and transition difficulties, adding another layer to an already closely watched story. Around the same broader period, Buckingham Palace carried out a private internal review involving about 10 staff members who had worked closely within the same operational circle. The inquiry, privately funded by Queen Elizabeth II, was conducted quietly, and its findings were never released to the public, though internal adjustments reportedly followed soon after. Across these overlapping accounts, a consistent theme emerged of high turnover among professionals accustomed to pressure, discretion, and elite service. Their exits were often interpreted differently depending on perspective, yet the repetition of departures kept the discussion alive. Outside formal institutions, another kind of narrative also grew, with former associates and friends describing strained relationships that later spilled into public conversation. Over time, a slang expression appeared online describing people who felt suddenly cut off after close involvement, reflecting how widely the pattern was being discussed in digital spaces. The term "marled" became part of informal online language, used to capture that sense of abrupt disconnection. This blend of professional exits, private investigations, and evolving public interpretation continues to shape how the wider story is understood, leaving behind competing views that remain debated in public discourse today itself. What kind of friendship survives from age 2 through marriage, divorce, and years of change without breaking apart? How did Naki Pretty remain so deeply tied to Meghan Markle's life? And what hidden moments from their shared past now cast a different light on everything they once thought was unshakable? Let's find out. When silence replaces friendship. Naki Pretty and Meghan Markle met at age 2. Their worlds grew together so closely that separation never seemed possible. Childhood sleepovers, long road trips, and a European holiday at 15 built a bond that felt effortless, as if it required no maintenance at all. Years later, in London in 2011, Pretty stood beside Meghan as maid of honor at her first wedding to Trevor Engelson. She was present through the marriage and remained through the eventual divorce, a witness to every shift in Meghan's personal journey. By the time Meghan stepped into royal life years later, that same friend was no longer on the guest list for the royal wedding on May 2018. There was no argument recorded, no public break, no final exchange that explained the change. Only absence replaced presence, and silence replaced explanation. Looking back, the pattern of connection and distance does not follow a straight line. Before the royal chapter fully began, Meghan had already been moving through shifting circles. In June 2020, her longtime confidant Jessica Mulroney, who had supported her through early media pressure and royal engagements, was suddenly cut off after a public controversy involving an online dispute. According to reports, the incident became the turning point that ended nearly a decade of close collaboration and friendship, leaving observers to interpret the change without clear explanation. Even earlier in 2016, Media personality Piers Morgan described meeting Meghan in London after casual social exchanges. That brief interaction ended without continuation once her attention shifted elsewhere, leaving him to later summarize it as a quiet disappearance rather than a formal ending. For those who once stood close to her, the absence of closure became the defining feature of their experience. Naki Pretty, speaking years later, chose her words carefully, suggesting that Meghan approached relationships with calculation and a strong sense of direction, knowing when to step forward and when to step away. Others who had once been inside her inner circle described similar experiences of sudden distance that arrived without warning or discussion. What remains most striking is not the connections themselves, but the way they ended. Across decades of shared history, the pattern repeated. Closeness built over years, then distance introduced without explanation. For those left behind, the unanswered questions lingered longer than the friendships themselves, shaping their memories into something they were still trying to understand, long after the final contact had faded away. The story leaves behind not answers, but echoes of bonds once considered unbreakable, reminding those involved that even the deepest connections can dissolve in silence rather than conflict or clear endings, leaving memory to do the work of explanation alone, unanswered and unresolved forever. How did the Duchess of Sussex title transform Meghan from a former actress into a global figure with access to power, influence, and multi-million-dollar opportunities? And what happens when an identity built by marriage, not birth, suddenly proves to be fragile, temporary, and far more contested than anyone expected? Let's uncover the astonishing details. The weight of a borrowed crown. The Sussex brand was never really about Meghan. It was about two words placed before her name, Duchess of Sussex, and the power those words quietly unlocked. They opened doors that otherwise would have stayed shut, turning private opportunities into global deals and placing her into rooms where influence is measured in millions and visibility. Long before the contracts and headlines, the identity itself carried weight far beyond her personal history. A former actress from Los Angeles, daughter of a lighting director, stepped into a role granted not by birth, but by marriage, and by royal authority alone. That title was never permanent. It existed on permission, not possession. It came with expectations, conditions, and an unspoken understanding that what is granted can also be withdrawn. Yet over time, that borrowed identity became the cornerstone of commercial power, shaping partnerships, streaming agreements, and public appearances. In 2020, after stepping back from official duties, the commercial use of that identity became even more central, raising questions that linger beneath polished branding. On another side of the royal divide, Harry remains bound by lineage. Born a prince, son of a king, grandson of a queen, his position within the House of Windsor is anchored in history itself. But Meghan's connection rests differently, constructed through marriage and recognition rather than inheritance. That distinction, though often overlooked in public conversation, is now increasingly relevant. According to a source linked to Prince William, a future shift is already being considered. When he eventually ascends to the throne, the removal of certain courtesy titles is expected to be pursued through formal channels. It is not framed as speculation but as intention, a structural adjustment rather than personal conflict. Such a change would not simply alter social identity, it would ripple into the commercial world built around that designation. Agreements signed under the banner of Duchess of Sussex could face renewed scrutiny. Partners, investors, and platforms may one day be asked what exactly they believed they were buying into, an individual or a title that no longer legally exists. The implications extend beyond reputation. They reach into legal territory where misrepresentation is not defined by intent, but by outcome. If the foundation of a deal shifts after the fact, questions do not disappear. They harden, becoming part of records, filings, and disputes that outlast public attention and reshape how borrowed status is ultimately understood. Public perception rarely stays fixed when titles and contracts collide. and history tends to revisit such arrangements with sharper scrutiny each time new leadership, new legal interpretation, and new documentation bring old assumptions back into question again in public discourse and record over time. Across the polished corridors of royal storytelling, Meghan Markle's image has been dissected through books, court filings, and decades of commentary, with Tom Bower's revenge and betrayal drawing from dozens of insider sources. Yet despite repeated legal pressure from her team, both works still stand unchallenged. What do these claims truly reveal? And why has every attempt to overturn them fallen short? Let's find out. The unraveling architecture of a royal brand. Across the polished corridors of modern royal storytelling, few names have been dissected with the same intensity as Meghan Markle. Her public image, carefully built and fiercely defended, has been pulled through layers of scrutiny that span books, court filings, interviews, and institutional records. Among those who have examined it most persistently is Tom Bower, author of Revenge in 2022 and Betrayal in 2026, drawing from around 80 sources across both works. Despite repeated legal pressure from Meghan Markle's highly active legal team, neither publication has faced a successful legal challenge, a silence that speaks less of absence of conflict and more of the strength of the material behind it. The deeper question has never been about commentary, but about structure. Remove the Duchess title, and the architecture supporting her commercial identity since 2020 begins to loosen. Every agreement, from production deals to branding ventures tied to Prince Harry and Meghan's joint ventures, rests on a status she once agreed not to use commercially. That framework is not symbolic, it is contractual, recorded, and preserved beyond any rebrand or social media adjustment. Even the polished visuals of streaming projects and curated online posts cannot overwrite signed documents, archived correspondence, or institutional records. Elsewhere in the record, contradictions accumulate through overlapping accounts in books, interviews, and press investigations. A workplace bullying inquiry involving multiple witnesses, alongside reports of staff departures from palace-adjacent offices, has been widely discussed in media coverage. At the same time, streaming partnerships and production deals with platforms like Netflix sit beside earlier origin narratives that shaped public perception of Meghan Markle's rise to public prominence. One such story, first highlighted in a Vanity Fair profile, referenced a school assignment explanation for her early aspirations, later revisited and debated in later commentary and interviews involving family members. In contrast, the institution she once publicly challenged moves with a different kind of finality. Prince William, as future king, represents a system that does not negotiate endlessly with narrative pressure. Within that structure, the removal of a title is not a dramatic spectacle, but an administrative procedure grounded in royal protocol. Two words can be withdrawn, yet the implications extend far beyond language. Once enacted, the commercial identity built around that status loses its foundation. Observers often describe institutional decisions in clinical terms. Once a decision is made, it is final, structured, and procedural. That same principle mirrors how constitutional monarchy operates. The machinery of the institution does not require agreement to proceed. It requires process, precedent, and record. As the line of succession continues toward the eventual reign of Prince William, the framework surrounding the Sussex brand exists within a narrowing set of formal constraints. Contracts remain on record, agreements remain active, and documented histories remain unchanged in legal form. No marketing adjustment or public rebranding can alter what has already been signed, archived, and legally preserved within corporate and institutional systems. So, what do you think? Could William have finally proven Meghan faked everything, and is she truly unraveling before our eyes? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.